Hi. Hi. Thank you for joining me. This is Gina. Thank you for joining me for this Astrology Chat live for February 17th, 2025. I'm excited to talk about the astrology of right now today. I try to do an overview at least once or twice a week. And other than that, we focus on specific transits or other aspects of astrology. Um, and I hope that these daily astrology chats sort of have the feeling of hanging out with your friend who just happens to know astrology. And I hope that it works for people, whether you're learning astrology yourself and you like to follow along with the chart, or if you just like to listen and hear about the astrology and don't want to pay as much attention to that level of things. I hope that these talks work for you too. I always try to structure them in such a way that they do. I also want to say, before I dive into this very extraordinary astrology of what's happening right now, that I'm hoping that today is my last day of using my iPad and my camera in this way. I am working on learning some software where I can screen share directly. So I will still take the camera around with me and do live videos sometimes, but I also will be able, hopefully, to screen share and just share more directly when we have videos like today, where we talk about the astrology. But I'll sort of remember fondly my hands in front of the camera, my pen pointing at different things as we move into a more pro setup, hopefully going forward. Okay, let's dive into the astrology of right now before I waste any more time. So, the personal planets are what I want to focus on today. The personal planets are the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. And these planets have the most direct significance in terms of our daily lives by transit. And then when we're talking about our natal chart, it has a lot to do, those planets have a lot to say about our personality, about the way we move through the world. So when we're looking at the current astrology, in terms of how things feel, how we're feeling, how we're moving, how we're interacting with the day, looking at those personal planets is always a great place to start. So, what I'm noticing right now is the extraordinary way in which all of those planets are in signs and houses where they're a little bit uncomfortable. You see, planets have different the planets move through all the signs and houses, and they're much more comfortable in some placements than others, right? And when they're in in a house, in a sign where they're not as comfortable, that planet is sort of called to do things differently. So, for example, Mars right now. Let's start with Mars. Mars is retrograde, so that's sort of an unusual thing for Mars to be doing as well. And Mars is in Mars is fallen. I have detriment here. That's actually not correct. I need to change that. That is not correct. I wish I could do it that easily. Here we go. Yeah, see, won't this be better when we're not doing it this way? So Mars has fallen in Cancer, said to be, because Mars is incredibly comfortable up here in Capricorn. Mars is exalted in Capricorn. This is Mars's absolute favorite place to be. So when Mars is the furthest away from that sign that it can possibly be, it's said to be fallen. So if you think of it as the ruler of the house that the planet is moving through, sort of impresses upon this planet its disposition. It's the dispositor of that planet. So in this house, the moon is the dispositor of Mars. So Mars is having to do moon-like things. That's not as comfortable. Mars likes to go. Mars likes to move. So when Mars is in Cancer, we have to do things differently, especially with this retrograde. Our actions, our willpower, our drive are moving in more uncomfortable ways, more unconventional ways, more indirect ways. You know, that sort of that willpower, that drive might be a little bit lessened during this time. And what we're called to do is to still act, still move forward without saying it's too well overwhelming, it's too much, and without lashing out, right? Can we show up differently? Can we have that Mars energy fallen and still interact with the world and still exert our authority, you know, take action, exert our willpower, even if it's a little bit indirect, without getting overwhelmed, without lashing out. Okay, let's move on to Venus. Venus right now is in Aries, and Venus is said to be in her detriment in Aries because Libra across the way is ruled by Aries, right? So, I'm sorry, is ruled by Venus. I get talking a little bit too quickly, especially I've noticed sometimes when I'm talking about Aries. So, when Venus is as far away from that rulership sign of Libra as it can be, we're again called to do things differently. Venus is said to be in her detriment in Aries. Venus is having to do Mars things, right? Mars is the dispositor of Venus when she's in Aries. And so instead of being all about relationships and the other and what works best for all of us, like Venus is able to do in Libra, what's beautiful, what works. Here, when Venus is here, we're all sort of being called to tap into our own wants and desires in a different way. We're kind of having to wrestle with that balance between independence and connection. We're focused on what we like, what we value, what we want, and being more bold and decisive when it comes to going after those things. So it's just a little bit differently. Usually Venus is a little bit different, excuse me. Usually Venus is so going along with everyone and getting along with everything. And here it's more about deepening that relationship with the self as well and expressing that into the world. Interesting how we're expressing ourselves differently right at this time, according to the astrology we're being called to. Okay, Mercury is also in a challenging placement right now. Remember I said all 5 personal planets are here. All 5, it's the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Mars, and Venus. Those are their personal planets, and all of them are going through something interesting. So we'll talk about the Sun and the Moon in a minute because they are a little different. But Mercury, Venus, and Mars are solidly in these signs, right? So Mercury in Pisces, Mercury is actually in its fall and its detriment in Pisces because across the way in Virgo, Mercury rules Virgo and is exalted in Virgo. So it's a challenging placement for Mercury. Mercury is all about our communication. And in Pisces, things are a little vague, things are a little murky, things are a little watery. So communication and ideas and understanding can almost take on like a mystical quality when Mercury is in Pisces. Things don't have the clarity that they would if we were over here in Virgo. So I think that we're being called to trust our intuition, to not cling to the details quite as much, to be a little bit more open-minded during this time. So, okay, so we have all of that going on. And like I said, it's really not bad. These things aren't bad. I think that they can be, it suggests that the planets are a little bit uncomfortable, but these planets move through all these signs and for a reason, because we're testing out those sides of ourselves. Um, we're learning how to do things in all kinds of different ways in this world. We're having all kinds of different experiences. And so, sort of exercising our personality, our will, our communication, our relationships in a different kind of way, it's right on time. Um, but it is interesting that it's a little different than what we're normally used to. So it's worth explaining. And it's also just a great time to talk about planetary dignities, which I did the other day, and I explained this setup in a little bit more simpler terms too. In another video. I'll link to those at the end here today. But now, because I feel like I'm a little bit all over the place and moving a little bit more quickly through these signatures. So if you want more information, I will attach those at the end. But let's talk about the sun and the moon. So we haven't yet, and they're really important. So here's what's interesting. Right now, as I'm recording this video, the moon is actually not fallen. The moon is in Libra. The moon's fine in Libra. But in a few hours tonight, the moon will move into Scorpio. And for a few hours, the moon will be in Scorpio where it's fallen, and the sun will be in Aquarius. But then very soon, just a few hours later, here on the East Coast, that's happening overnight that they're both in their detriment fall. Because in the morning, just a few hours after the moon moves into Scorpio, the sun will move into Pisces, which again is sort of a better placement, and the sun will be out of its detriment. So we only have a few hours overnight for the East Coast where all 5 personal planets are in detriment or fall. But I just had to mention it. It's really exceptional. I don't think I've ever seen it before. Okay. So we talked about how these energies are moving differently, and I'll link to some videos as well at the end here that give more information on that. But now let's talk about the sun and the moon. Okay, so we're coming out of the sun in Aquarius time. The sun is in its detriment in Aquarius because the sun is the ruler of Leo. And so being as far away from home as possible, the sun is a little bit more uncomfortable. And, the sun is all about sort of our personal identity, whereas Aquarius is a little bit more about the collective, sort of detached from individuals and more tuned into like humanity as a whole. So, how can we still shine as our authentic selves, even in a crowd where we don't feel like we fully fit in? How can we still really be authentic, even, I don't know, in a world that doesn't always accept that? There's this sort of balance with the sun in Aquarius where we're having to work out our own individual identity versus the collective, our personal beliefs, feelings, personality, even versus what's expected in the collective, and sort of finding and navigating that distance. And then the moon in Scorpio, which we will have for a couple of days. Thankfully, by tomorrow morning, by Tuesday morning, the sun will be in Pisces while we're working with this. And that's actually pretty auspicious. We have a nice water sign thing going on at that time. But the moon in Scorpio is a little bit uncomfortable. The moon in Scorpio is fallen because the moon rules, or rather is exalted in Taurus. Moon is exalted in Taurus, favorite place to be. So when it's as far away as it can possibly be from that sign and houses, it's said to be fallen. And the moon is all about sort of our emotions and expressing ourselves and having feelings and sharing them with others, and what brings us comfort. And there's something about Scorpio that internalizes too much for the moon to really love being there. I think that the moon in Scorpio, we're sort of being called to process a little bit more internally rather than express our emotions. Also, I think that the moon really values stability and that comfort and that security, whereas Scorpio is a little more open to transformation than that. Also values security and stability. Everyone does. It's a natural human need. However, Scorpio, if things will improve or be for the better through a transformation, even if that transformation is difficult, Moon in Scorpio is up for it. So, sort of choosing transformation over stability with the Moon in Scorpio, choosing processing internally rather than always expressing our biggest emotions with others. Um, and, I just think that through this process, with all of this going on, and again, I am going to link to 2 other videos at the end because I feel like I didn't move it super closely, super clearly. But I feel like with all of this going on, I really think we're like deepening our trust with ourselves and with others. You know, we're doing it differently. Things have changed. We've changed. Showing up in the same way as we always did, moving through the day in the same way we always did, it just doesn't make sense anymore. And through expressing ourselves in these more authentic ways, even if they're new, even if they're different, even if they're a little bit uncomfortable, we are deepening our confidence in ourselves, our trust in ourselves, other people's confidence in us, their trust in us, our confidence in them, our trust in them. It's all a really positive process as we're getting ready to move into some really, really interesting astrology toward the end of the month. We've kind of had a little bit of a lull here for a few days, aside from the energy of these placements. There haven't been a lot of new transits coming in since the full moon in Leo a few days ago. And I think that's interesting in itself. It's been a little bit quieter of a sky while we're working with these planetary placements. It's sort of been giving us the time and space needed, maybe, to show up a little bit differently. I'm just checking my comments real quick. Thank you for bearing with me over this time. If you're someone who stuck with me with the iPad work, I really appreciate you. And please just know too, I might be running some tests on the channel the next couple days. So, um, if a video says it's going to be live and it's called test, it's probably just going to be really boring and me seeing if I can get the technology to work. Oh, interesting. Miss Tell, I'm seeing your note about Moon and Scorpio. I have a couple really great people with their Moon and Scorpio as well, and just Scorpio signatures in general, and I really like them. She's saying that she has friends with Moon and Scorpio, and they happen to be some of her favorite people. I love the depth of Scorpio. I love the listening, the way in which they want to have really, really sincere uh, meaningful connections, you know? Um, and I just appreciate all of you so much. Miss Tell, thank you so much for being here today. And thank you everyone for hanging in with the technology. And good luck navigating these energies. I think it's some really extraordinary astrology. Do things differently. And I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll be back again tomorrow. Thank you.